are back, and this time with Kim James, the director of DroneGuards. And Kim, welcome. You'll be speaking on the securing high-value assets from above while grappling with the cost-benefit equation. I do just want to say we're all thankful you're alive and well after that apparent airplane incident recently that occurred. But otherwise,
thanks very much.
Great to have you on, and the floor is yours. So your screen will be shared, and go ahead with your presentation. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you so much, Mike and team, and thanks for having me. So my name is Kim James, as Mike said. Today, I'm going to be talking from a completely different perspective to what Mike and Chris spoke about. First of all, we in South Africa refer to RPAS or drones, but for today's talk, I'm going to be referring to drones for the ease of it. And also I'm going to be talking from an operator perspective and also from a position of drones for good. So this is where we use drones to protect people and what we call high value assets. So this is property, mines, or anything that would be deemed a valuable asset. So I'd like to very briefly give you a bit of background on myself. As Mike said, I'm the director of DroneGuards, which is our security brand. Our operating license under Part 101 of South Africa, and I'll get to that in a bit, is UAV aerial works. For my sins, I am the safety and security post holder from a regulatory perspective. I'm very fortunate to be on the COASA EXCO, which is the Commercial Unmanned Aircraft Association of Southern Africa. And if anyone's picked up a copy of Drone Professional 1, I had the privilege of writing a chapter in that book about drone security in South Africa. A very quick background. We also have a company called Sky Robots, where we are betting on the future of fully autonomous security drones, where we're developing a full turnkey drone security solution. And in our Aerial Works brand, we do surveys, inspections, etc. But today I'm going to be talking about the security aspect of our business, and that's where we actually conduct aerial drone security surveillance, and we also do some drone security advisory. So why security? South Africa takes up, unfortunately, 4 spots in the top 10 most dangerous places in the world to live from a crime stats perspective, and that was updated, I believe, in June this year. Socioeconomic issues in South Africa, unemployment, which is estimated to being above 35% by the end of this year, does drive crime, and it's everything from opportunistic crime where someone is hungry and is going to steal an electric fence that you think is protecting your property here in South Africa to turn in for scrap metal, to highly sophisticated crime syndicates. So how do we as an operator do this in South Africa without laboring the regulations? South Africa has the mandate to interpret and implement standards and recommended practices from ICAO, and we consider the local context. And in 2015, the RPAS Part 101 was promulgated, and to date, there are only about 70 odd remote operating certificate holders in South Africa. And out of those, I believe there are probably only 3 or 4 that focus on drone security. Needless to say, regulations have been overtaken by technology. and we'll get to that a little bit further on. So drones in South Africa, just as a very brief overview again, from a regulatory perspective, on the bottom right-hand side, the company operating has to be registered under Part 101. The individual flying the drone has to be licensed by the Civil Aviation Authority of South Africa, and the drones have to be insured for third-party liability insurance. So what does my day-to-day job entail when it comes to drone security? So expectation management, basically. I put the slide in. It always gets a few giggles. I can't see anyone, but normally in an audience, before our lovely COVID-19 restrictions, I would actually play a video from The Oblivion, and you can see Tom Cruise there. And the reason we put that in there is because the first conversations that come up when we talk to potential clients around drone security surveillance is, can you weaponize this drone? And unlike Mike and Chris, who talked about shooting drones down in counter-drone measures, what we have to deal with here is individual security companies, etc., having expectations that we can actually shoot criminals from the drone. So the answer is, I guess one could, but we may not yet at this stage, although we are looking into non-lethal weaponized drones for the future, and that would be things like pepper spray or anything non-lethal like that. Needless to say, we may not do that now. This is a very rudimentary explanation of where we are today versus expectations. And the current state is we have security, ground security, protecting our residents in residential areas, as well as small commercial sites, small holdings, farms, mines, etc. What is possible today in 2020, regulatory-wise, is that we have one drone operated by one drone operator. And that drone operator has to be on the site that the drone is being operated from. So we essentially fly from A, wherever we're flying, to landing back at B. And that is where the remote pilot station would be. Expectations and absolutely what technology and regulations, I guess, are aiming for is that you could potentially have one operator with multiple drones, and that would be, that kind of swarming effect. And that operator may not actually be on site. And then the future would be fully autonomous drones. But what we can do today is one operator and one drone. And where are we using these drones to, in the South African context, protect high value assets and people? And that would be anything from residential estates, as I already said, communities, in crowd control, shopping centers, mines, commercial properties, game reserves, crime scene management, or anywhere where there's an asset to be protected. Essentially, we want to be one step ahead of the criminal on the ground. So what are some of the applications, again, in a South African context, and what we are doing? For anyone who is on this on the stream, in South Africa, you would know that we have residential areas, or for anyone who's not familiar with the South African context, you would refer to them as gated communities. So these are anything from a few hundred houses to a few thousand houses that are protected by a border or a perimeter fence or wall. Much like farms or small commercial sites, and that's what we focus on. So when we talk about unmanned aerial vehicle activity or drone activity, what are we actually using the drone for? So in the first instance, we want to add a layer of defense. So much like the expectation management we do every day, which says the drone cannot capture, the drone can identify, the drone can pursue, and the drone can be the eye in the sky for the security operation on the ground. So we work very closely with security companies. And in the first instance, we want to be proactive. So where we oftentimes in areas of residential protection get to see criminals that are more opportunistic, they have, however, staked out that area for a number of days or even weeks. And so early detection is what we're all about. That is what we want to be able to use as prevention more than anything else. So this is where we talk about visible policing, day and night operations, where individuals would ordinarily have weeks and days to stake out, as I said, and then hit when they know the coast is clear. As soon as the drone is in the air and they see this thing that they've never seen before, they move on to the next softer target. So in the first instance, that's a win for us. Where we then use randomization, and we joke about this being our mathematical secret, we have patrols as well as randomized patrols. That is where we can respond to specific incidents. And in a South African context where it is extremely easy to obtain illegal weapons, the criminals don't think twice about shooting at a security guard. We've had many incidents where security guards get injured or killed. And so in this instance, the drone would most likely be taken off the planned mission and respond to an incident, whether that would be a zone or a perimeter trigger or something that gets called in from a security guard, or even something that the drone has picked up. That would then enable decision support. So do you send your security guard on the ground into a situation where you can see 5 armed or heavily armed men breaching a perimeter fence? And so that is mitigating, it's monitoring, and it's allowing that decision support. And then lastly, post-incident activity. So if there is an incident, the incident would have been recorded. Data analysis is referred to any activity where, for example, the criminals have run off and the drone has been able to record their MO. So where is their path that they've staked out, their escape path? Where have they breached a perimeter fence that's maybe a neighboring property, etc.? And we also use that for training purposes. So I'd like to show you a few examples. I would ordinarily play videos, but I haven't taken the chance given the intermittent Wi-Fi signal in this area where I am at the moment. So I've just taken screenshots. But as I said previously, we combine our surveillance with visible and covert operations. This is a very quick example of a residential estate that was affected by cable theft. So in South Africa, copper cable theft, underground cables get stolen on the daily. It's been reported as of last year, I think, that The losses in South Africa of copper cable theft run up to the $400 billion a year. And that leaves residential areas without power, main transport lines without power, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a massive problem. And in the residential estates where the copper cables get stolen, these copper cables run through neighboring properties, under roads, into government land, et cetera, et cetera. So we do patrols over 8 properties in that residential area, including a road. And the reason why that's significant is because in the context of South African regulations, landowner permission needs to be obtained for each of those pieces of land. Needless to say, even after a few weeks of flying these routes, human activity is reduced completely. So again, the next best softer target is then chosen rather than where the drone is actually patrolling. This is an example of activity, untoward activity at a very large private upmarket game reserve in South Africa. And given COVID-19 lockdown, there was very little activity in terms of residents coming to their weekend houses, etc. And the criminals had plenty of time to access these grounds and stake out where they were going to break in. And so this is an example of thermal cameras, high definition thermal cameras that can pick up human activity. And over there, you can see in that triangle, a person standing still. This is pitch dark. You cannot see your hand in front of your eye. Your hand in front of your eyes. And this is what the thermal camera picks up. So the ground forces are then able to be pinpointed to where that person is actually hiding. And this is an example of a small holding where we patrol at night. And this is the very simplest of computer vision software where items are identified is essentially identified, and this is where we're teaching the computer basically to identify the difference between vehicles and humans. We can track distances, etc. Given a small holding, there are a lot of animals. So from a thermal or a heat signature perspective, you really want to rule those things out. So we're getting better and better at identifying the untoward activity versus what's already there. And in the context, again, of residential areas, this is where we would go and do a risk assessment of the specific sites, weak spots. So a little river that's running through a golf estate, wide open areas that are used as thoroughfares between roads by pedestrians coming to work, for example, stormwater drainage coming onto the property, and the most favorite of criminals in South Africa, the transformer station or the substation where metal is stolen, etc. And that then allows us to specifically design the waypoint flying for the patrols, but also the randomization where these areas are then patrolled during the day and night. This is not a very good image. This is actually a really good video. Also, again, absolutely dark. And this is a person detected running along a road, not realizing that the drone can actually see his every move. He eventually ran back up this road, hid in the tree, came out, looked again, actually kind of clocked the drone, so was looking up the entire time. But because the drone was pursuing him, he obviously realized the drone could see him. But it gave us enough time to actually get the ground force in place to actually apprehend that person. So how does this help residential estates? And we talk about residential estates because that's what's targeted these days. It's opportunistic. It's, of course, the farm murders and, very serious crime is of course an issue. But this, in the first instance, is where individuals will be protected. They've bought into a residential area that's meant to be keeping them safe. Now, I also want to point out that, of course, it's not a myth that millions of people in South Africa live in poorer areas where crime is just as high. And how do we protect them is another story. And that's where hopefully law enforcement and public safety agencies will hopefully, adopt this technology more. But for now, we're talking about these residential estates. So residents want to feel safe. They know that video footage can be used as evidence. So quite often these criminals, are able to break through a perimeter fence, steal something untoward, but still get away with it. Even if they're caught, what proof is there? So bearing in mind data privacy issues that we're all very familiar with, this footage is legally obtained, it's date stamped, it's geotagged, of course, and so we can use that for legal evidence. The response times are decreased. So, in one incident, for example, there was a trigger alarm along an electric fence. This was before we started our patrols. And the security guards in their vehicle took half an hour to find where that actual fence was cut. So by having eyes in the sky and having a vantage point, we can clearly redirect or direct and pinpoint ground patrols. Again, as I said earlier on, this is an additional layer of defense. It is not something that can be used in isolation. So we can use it as a deterrent, we can use it as a tool to pursue, and we can also guide ground reaction force. I've already talked about having the eyes in the sky with the thermal camera. And of course, in a security context, the human is the weakest link. So again, in the South African context, the security guards are often intimidated and threatened to, perhaps in the most benign reaction, delay a response of a ground crew or give information. And with the drone, it's technology. So they're more effective, they're more reliable. And again, the way we talk about the effectiveness, if a drone can, although we don't fly 30 kilometers an hour during night missions, but it can, by patrol, fly that much and cover way more distance over a perimeter, for example, than a guard patrolling on foot at, say, 5 kilometers an hour. Of course, the guard has a torch, but maybe they're 6 foot tall. And so this clearly gives a higher focus during high cry times from a different vantage point. We've also done some cool security stuff. For example, this is the aerial view of a exclusion zone for a building that was imploded, and the project team requested us to fly the perimeter to ensure that after the evacuation had taken place, that no human activity was detected, and specifically on roofs, etc. So we worked very closely with the integrated security company, the demolition team, the disaster recovery management team, etc. And then, of course, again, in a South African context, where all the focus was on this imploding building, the expectation from local security and local police was that cars and cars would have been broken into, etc. So we did security patrols there. So I did say that I was going to talk about the cost-benefit equation here and how we secure our high-value assets while grappling with this cost equation and some of the challenges. So this is where, from a security surveillance perspective, clearly we need to stay ahead of the criminal. And of course, operating legally means that we have a lot of considerations, and where the criminal doesn't care about safety or regulations, we have to. So if we just look to the right of my slide, and I won't talk to every single point, but essentially safety is of utmost importance when we're operating a drone, and everything we talk about safety is about flying over people, property, and public roads. So we make absolutely sure during day and night operations that that is first and foremost what we focus on. The regulations determine that where we have to operate at short notice in a crime situation that is not our client, that is not on site, where we've already taken all the permissions into account, where we've already done our risk assessments, where we've already ensured privacy, etc., that there's a time delay. So a good example, a few weeks ago, I got a frantic call from a local municipal councillor that said that in a bike park, or I think it's kind of a game reserve where people can ride mountain bikes, a cyclist was stabbed, I believe, and the bike was stolen. And they wanted us to come straight away to come and see whether we could identify from the air where these criminals were hiding, because they were believed to be hiding under bushes, etc. And so, of course, by procedure, we checked where the site was, and that site was pretty much next door to a military airport, so in controlled airspace. And so there's no way as an operator we could fly in controlled airspace without getting flexible use of airspace approval, filing a flight plan, and that would most likely, in the best possible way, take 24 hours, but many times longer. So we couldn't help them. So from a regulation perspective, there is a time delay to really get response in emergency situations. The privacy is an issue, and we have to work very closely with the homeowners association of these residential estates to ensure that all the residents are on board, that they don't think that we're spying on them, because that's exactly what human nature is. If there's a drone in the air, they think it's spying on them. And then, of course, where we want to pursue a criminal, we have a few challenges, notwithstanding the actual technology. So how far can your drone fly? What's the hang time, i.e. battery time? But also landowner permission. I alluded to it earlier on. The criminal is not going to care where we have landowner permission or not. So if they leg it after they've been detected over fences, through property, over a national road, etc., in circumstances where the operator does not have permission to fly over those areas, we cannot pursue further than where we already have obtained permission. Top over here, so who pays for this? So in the case where we want to secure a motorway, for example, where from a seaport to a land port, there are high value freight issues. We've already designed a safe corridor solution from an aerial surveillance perspective, protecting high value freight. Who pays for that security? So is it the roads agencies? Is it the freight forwarders? Is it the insurance company? So that's a question we haven't answered yet. The cost of delivering this service is still very high. So because it's regulated to have to be manned, so there has to be a drone crew on site. They have to be in control of that drone, even though we have automated flights for a lot of the missions. And the drones are also quite expensive. So, of course, it's all about the sensor. So the thermal camera, the high definition thermal camera, is often the most important, but in night operations specifically, the most expensive. And even though you would think that in a country with crime as high as we have, that individuals and organizations and government would pay to secure its residents, its citizens and residents and businesses, it's often unaffordable. And then, of course, we have the technology challenges, the hang time. I alluded to that earlier on. We would like to stay in the air for longer than we currently do, to prevent the battery changing every now and again. Not every now and again, apologies, regularly. Again, the drones are quite expensive, and also the cost is driven by the fact that in 24-hour operations, the batteries and the drones do need to be replaced regularly. And then inclement weather does stop us flying. So there's certain thresholds within which we can fly from a gust and wind perspective. And of course, we don't fly in heavy rain. But criminals operate and they come out to play during rain because they know that security operations generally are reduced during those kind of inclement weather days. So we don't have answers to many of these things, but where we are operating, we are seeing a reduction in crime for sure. And I will close off by saying that we believe the future is bright. We all know that drone technology is plowing ahead, and when it comes to autonomous flight, when it comes to machine learning, artificial intelligence, we are betting on the fact that the machine will alert the human as opposed to someone sitting in a control room where our drone video is streamed, where a security guard is sitting monitoring a screen. The machine will alert that human when an intervention is required. And of course, that whole cyber physical world that we're moving to. So I could continue talking. I think I've given you a good enough overview. I hope. I am open to questions. And thank you so much for allowing me to share what we do.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was eye-opening, to say the least. And honestly, it was probably the first physical drone security, talk that I've seen. A lot of them do focus on all the other aspects, but it was just amazing. And I think the fact that, as you said, you had the real pictures of your operations, the fact that, people wanted you to fly near the military base, but there was that, regulation issue. I'm sure that tore you apart in being there in the moment, having to really, kind of balance the risk. But also a bit scary to know that, some criminals know that during heavy rain, it's probably easier to get past some of those drone guards. So just really, really interesting. And we do have some questions that have come in from some different places. If you're happy to answer some.
Absolutely, Mike. Yes.
All right, so let's kick him off with the first one. Mark said, do you use thermal or night vision on your drones? And do you ever have adversaries that use drones with those also?
So, Mark, yes, we use thermal. We use thermal cameras. Those images that I showed are from the cameras we use, so the sensors we use. We have the one image I showed you. We have dual cameras, so even during the day, you can see the day view and the thermal view. And then the second part of the question on, I guess, from the context of what you're talking about today, using them, we haven't in South Africa, and I've spoken to many people, I've researched this. I don't think we have seen that yet. From everything we've seen, and even one of the other drone operators that has been doing specifically night operations in very hostile territory, where criminal gangs, criminal syndicates have been stealing millions and millions and millions of rands worth of cables and what have you for years. They still don't really know how this drone technology works. They think it's some satellite that's seeing it. They know it's something from above, but they don't really know what it is yet. So I'm sure it will come, but I am not aware of any party that's used it to counter or for negative and criminal reasons.
Okay, very interesting. And the next question is very similar to that. I'll just pick it out because it talks about countermeasures. It says, has anyone ever used countermeasures against your drones or the drone guards? For example, trying to get past them in gated communities?
Yeah, good question. I do get this asked a lot, and I'm sure I'll eat my words at some point. But we have not had any issues. We really, and I hope it stays that way. We have not. So, yeah, the worst we've seen is the individuals that have been spotted and have been pursued. We have drones with spotlights as well. So, that's kind of the thing where we can then hover over that individual or the group of individuals and wait for the ground crew to arrive, where, they start throwing stones up at the drone. But we have not experienced or heard of any counter drone activity. So yes, I hope that stays that way. I'm sure looking at the rest of the world, maybe it'll come. But yeah, we haven't seen that.
I think that's good. Touch wood, and let's hope it stays that way.
So, exactly.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
We have a question here from Jacob, who said, I'm in Durban and I'm very, very interested in how much something like this would cost. Is it accessible to everyday homeowners or only large organizations?
Good question. It is expensive because, unlike the expectation that oftentimes an individual has of the capability of an entry-level thermal camera, that is not good enough for a night operation. So if you take a little commercially available Mavic 2, for example, it has a dual camera. It will give you a heat signature, but you won't be able to tell the difference between a hot rock and a concrete wall that's been heated up during the day in summer and someone lying on the ground, hugging the rock to try and avoid you, even if they, they've figured out the thermal part of it. I'm happy to take this offline and give you some idea, but the drones that we use and the cameras we use are pretty expensive, and then combining that with the vehicle fit out, the fact that the individuals need to be working shifts, etc. It is quite expensive. So the individual homeowner will most likely not want to and won't afford this. So it would ordinarily be the larger estates where the homeowners association has, large coffers, or larger companies.
Great. And Jacob, obviously, you can message Kim with her details there for more information on that. Kim, there's just two more questions here. The first, you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable, but someone said, what software or flight planning route software do you use for mission planning? I think that was that one slide you may have had there in the city area where you showed it.
Yeah, so we use various software, and obviously we continue testing different software that comes up. So it varies. That I think that would have been Mission Planner or something, but we continually explore what's out there, and of course we've built our own as well, which we're probably going to start using soon too.
Brilliant. And also a question just came in from Stratavia Aerial Solutions that said, is there a place for tethered drones, or is this regarded as fully autonomous? Okay, so tethered drones, I'm not convinced on the tethered drone solution yet. I think where a tethered drone might be good is in a parking lot and we thought of actually combining tethered drones in the scenario of securing a seaport where there's a specific area that just needs to be monitored constantly. The thing about a tethered drone is it obviously has its diameter that it is able to have monitored, but you're still going to have some eyes in the sky to pursue if there is something that is identified as untoward. And so I don't link the actual manned multi-rotor or fixed wing as an alternative to that, meaning autonomous, but the flexibility of being able to plan specific routes where threats develop. So, for example, and we see this all the time, as the layers of defense are added, so the criminals will figure out where they, where the weakest link will remain. And so from a drone perspective, being flexible and being able to fly to new areas that are seen as the weakest link and protecting those, as opposed to maybe putting in extra fences or extra radars on the ground or whatever it is, will then top the use of a tethered drone. If that's answered your question, I think so. Automated versus autonomous, that's obviously two different things. So we do automate flights for sure. We do waypoint flying. We save and have different zones set up that we fly randomly. But then, of course, we have to be able to take control of that drone at any time if there's a trigger at an opposite side of that site, or if it's picked something up, we have to obviously come off that mission and hover or pursue or what have you. So that would be automated parts of the flight and not autonomous. So fully autonomous flight is not regulated yet and therefore not allowed at all, although we really want to get there. So drone in a box
on top of a building and deployed autonomously to a trigger point, that's where we need to be heading to.
Wow, sounds like sometimes you get quite busy in between gigs and you need to pull a drone out and go to another incident. How often does that actually happen, Kim?
Not often. And so this is where I kind of try and explain. And again, I'm not a security specialist from a, Chris from an Interpol perspective would be able to speak to this, and criminologists, etc. But this is where, if you look at police reports, for example, and their reports are focused on arrests, for example, whereas I would much rather be reporting on how few arrests there are, because then policing is working, right? So where we really are reporting is as soon as we start working in an area, the criminal activity and human activity where it's untoward is reduced. So, but we do often get a call through from one of the ground force security guys that said, please come and look at this. And this is where we think that machine learning in the first instance has a real role to play, because, we know that if there's an area on an adjacent piece of land which does not ever have anything moving in it, then if there is something moving, it'll be untoward, as opposed to, oh, can you just check if that's an animal or a human? Oh, it's just one of the security guards, or it's just a resident, or what have you. So we do often come off the missions and go and check things out. But the visible policing aspect of it is very cool, because that's where people suddenly realize something's watching me. And even the security guards, oftentimes the security companies in the first instance will say to us, can you use the drones to check on our security guards? And so oftentimes we do that. So, it's about managing that human element. I don't know if I answered your question. You said it seems that we get quite busy between missions. I can't remember what your second part of the question was.
Yeah, you definitely answered it, and it's a great war story to have in terms of what they want you to check out. That's the thing. You put a drone nearby someone, and they all want to play with it. So I understand. I will ask you the one last question we had. This one coming from Twitter, and it said, "You sound like you work with a lot of different partners. Have you done any work with the anti-hijacking unit or helping prevent hijackings?"
That is a very good question. So there's a lot of, okay, so in the first instance, no, we haven't. There's so much that we can do. There was an article the other day that someone wrote on the back of another cash and transit heist event. And so it's a big issue in South Africa, these cash and transit heists. People, the security guards, the drivers get killed, they blow up vehicles, obviously the money gets stolen, but it's always a massive crime scene. And so the question to me was, posed to me was, why aren't you guys, or why isn't South Africa, or why aren't the security companies using drones to secure a corridor that the cash and transit route or the cash and transit van is going to take? Why aren't drones being used to map out the areas alongside those routes to understand where the crime might come from, or why, where the threat might come from? And I mean, the $1 million question is, why aren't drones being used to actually fly above these vehicles and track them on their paths? And the answer is they could, but here's the thing: you're now flying from controlled airspace to uncontrolled airspace to controlled airspace. You're flying over a residential area. You're flying over a motorway. You're potentially, flying in restricted airspace. So we still have a lot of work to do to get to a point, and UTM is a key thing. Some of the regulations around landowner permission. So if it's a municipal permission that we need to get to fly over a road, at this point in time, and no offense to anyone, but it is almost impossible to get, because no one really in these municipalities wants to take responsibility for saying, yes, I allow you to do that. So within all the other legalities, assuming everything else is checked, that's the last authority one would need. But practically, how does that work? So you're following a cash and transit vehicle, or you are, to the question that someone posed, and I can't see the comments at this point, so apologies, I don't know who asked it, but assuming the anti-hijacking unit or wherever the hotspots are. So you have drone surveillance. What is it actually doing? So again, it might be preventative, so the hijackers might move off, but you really can only counter something, you can really only use something where you're going to have your ground backup. So, and where do you station the pilot that will keep them safe? And that's a big consideration for us in South Africa doing this kind of work. The pilots, the crew, have to be safe. They can't be out, on a main road flying a drone. I think there's more to be done. We have spoken to some of these agencies. There's a drone council that's been formed in South Africa that's actually addressing a lot of these things. The current regulations make it difficult to do things more flexibly that will allow us to work with the likes of the anti-hijacking unit, etc. But yeah, the simple answer is we haven't, but notwithstanding some of these considerations, we absolutely should.
Very interesting. I feel like that could have been turned into a podcast episode almost. So thank you for your detailed answer, Kim. And just on the Drone Council, can anyone find out more about that through you, or is it online? How would people find out about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you follow me on social media, I'm on LinkedIn. I've posted quite a bit about that. So with my role in CUASA, we are quite involved, and we do a lot of work together with Drone Council. So it's dronecouncil.africa, and they've got quite a nice website. It's quite simple. They've got 10 chambers, which essentially address every part of the drone industry that really through the Drone Council is going to be driven and expanded. A lot of work has to be done, but I feel like the right players are in place. So anyone who has anything to say or wants to hear what's going on, do follow what the Drone Council is doing for sure.
Brilliant. Well, Kim, that's all the questions. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us such an eye-opening look into physical drone security. I really thought it was fantastic, and I'm sure many others did. So thank you for your time, and we really appreciated you having on, and hope you enjoy the rest of your conference and the rest of your weekend.
Thanks so much, Mike, and thank you for having me. I've enjoyed it. I was on from the beginning, and I will stay to hear the rest of the speakers. So thank you so much, and I'm happy to connect with anyone and answer further questions. It's been a real pleasure, Mike. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kim.